back here at Edmonton Comics talking about grading comics this time around with our special guest hypnotist Wayne Lee. Still doing well?
Doing awesome. Good? Yeah, you betcha, Jay.
Alrighty, so Wayne brought in some fantastic comics for us to show off to everyone here, and now we're going to talk a little bit more about grading. Wayne, when you bought these comics, and you didn't buy them recently, you bought them a while ago, did you know about grading comics, or did you have an idea of what you were looking for when you were going to buy them?
I did, and to answer that specifically, I knew that there was a grading system. I was familiar with Overstreet. And back in the 90s and the 80s, it was like, hey, let's pull out the book. Oh, it's already outdated. So I had an idea, and I think it was a different scale or the way they've done it. But yet I never really said, well, this is this. I could in my own mind go, oh, I hope this is that great. But it's like I'm still curious about what it would be graded as of these, and it may look good to me. Yet, like you were saying, in regards to some of the things that stand out, somebody that's professional looking at it and grading it, there's things that you look at that I don't see.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, and that's the whole thing. So Wayne did mention something very specific here. He mentioned the Overstreet grading guide. This is the Overstreet price guide, which comes out every year. Overstreet also has a grading guide. Now, Overstreet has been kind of the benchmark standard for grading and assessing comics for decades. The first one came out in 1970, and it's actually kind of fun. If you pick up, they have a reprint edition of it, you can see how affordable comics were back in those days compared to how they are now. The Overstreet guide is still recognized and used by an awful lot of collectors. It's still very popular, has a lot of market research and information in it. But the grading guide was the thing that became key for quite a while, as the grading guide really helped people have some consistency when looking at books and assessing their value. Because at the end of the day, like you kind of mentioned, I can look at this book and say it's a certain grade. You will look at that book maybe with a sense of nostalgia and say, the grade's a little better. And then somebody who's looking to buy the book could come in and say, that book is not worth what you think it is. And that's the subjectivity of it. So the grading guide, though, does help kind of give us a standard. Grading is done on a 10-point scale. And on that 10-point scale, it actually moves at a 0.5 level, starting at 0.5, going up to 9. Once you get to 9, it goes by 0.2, so it goes 9.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, up to 10. 10 is the top of our scale. Now, it is not a perfect scale. It is not just a nice even slide. It's actually on a curve. So lower conditions actually almost have like a more lesser value. Wow, that was terrible English. Good thing I sell comics. I'm not a teacher, am I right? But that it curves so that the lower the condition of the book, the lower the grade is compared to a high grade book, which seems kind of weird and kind of odd, but that's kind of the way it goes. So
when we have one question for, or just something that popped in my head, is that I remember now that you asked my question and I had time to think about the grading, I remember it was more not on necessarily a number scale. It was more of mint, near mint, fine, very fine. And is it correlate now still?
It does. So in the grading guide, when they actually have a grade of like a 9.8, the 9.8 also has like a letter grade with it. So mint or near mint. So gotcha. M or NM. And as you go down, you get VGs, VFs, Fs, stuff like that. I personally always found that very confusing because the letters stood for good, fair, and how to remember good is better than fair, or is fair better than good. I prefer the number scale. It just makes more sense to me. And a lot of people will come in and just ask for, I'm looking for good graded comics. And it's like, okay, I have to think. And within that good, you have plus, you have the benchmark good, but you have a minus and a plus. So there's actually kind of like 3 sections of a letter grade as well. So it can get kind of tricky. I think the numbers is just a little bit more efficient.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So when we looked at Wayne's books when we brought them out, we saw, and we still see, some really fantastic books. When people are grading them, there is kind of the rumor, the myth, the legend that 80% of a grade of a book is based on the cover. So if you have a book with an amazing or an excellent cover, 80% of the grade that you're going to assign it is based off of that, which is not always entirely accurate. When we're grading a book, we're looking at any potential deficiencies within that book. And the deficiencies are kind of accumulative. So the more deficiencies you have, even if they're minor, if there's multiples, it can bring the grade down further. However, that said, going back to the subjectivity, if the book still presents and shows well, then it's still maybe going to get a high grade and demand a higher value. So it is kind of tricky to play with everything. when we are looking at assessing books, we are looking at things like how does the book align at the fold? How are the staples? Are the corners nice and tight and not curved or chipped? We're looking at coloration. Is it faded at all? Is it still solid or super bright? All sorts of little things. And then when you're doing a proper grade, you're actually going to open up the book. You're going to go page by page and look at every page. Are there little notes or things written inside the book? Are there coupons missing? All sorts of things. How are the staples inside? The staples that you see on the outside might look really clean, but on the inside they could be rusted, which is actually something that happens. So everything gets checked every single page. So it's actually quite a laborious process, which we're not going to do here today. We're also not going to do it because if I assign a grade to one of these books, let me tell you, nerds are relentless. And if I give this book a grade, I'm instantly going to get hammered with comics like, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not a 4, it's a 6, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to avoid all that mess. But we're going to talk about this in a different way, slightly. I've got here 3 copies of a comic called Black Panther, which I think people are pretty familiar with. Can I lay them down? Is that going to work, if that's okay? So we have 3 different copies of the same book, and as you can see, they're right off the bat. You probably notice a few little differences between them. First of all, the one over here on your right, our left, you can see the white of the spine. So it means that when it was folded and wrapped, it wasn't quite lined up properly, because when we look at the other copies, they're folded right on that black line, right? Here, this one here, it's a little bit off at the top, but then meets up at the bottom, right? So when people are looking and grading and assessing these books, if we're looking, say, just at the cover wrap, this one is already the best of the bunch, and these two, especially this one, because there's so much white, it's gonna get knocked down, right? Other things that people are looking for very specifically are staples. Are the staples kind of hitting right dead into the middle? And I think, yeah, when I was looking at your Avengers 4, we can see the staple here gets up onto the cover. So that is actually going to be pretty detrimental to the overall grade. People are going to look at that. The staple's not where it's supposed to be. It's misaligned, and therefore it's going to lose some points on that. Coming back to the Black Panthers, we'll see that some of them have some nice sharp corners. Some of them are a bit more rounded. Some of them have folds. And out of these 3 books, they're actually all slightly different grades. So this one here is the best of the 3. Even though it's got a little bit of that kind of uneven spine, this one rates at what's called a 7.5 out of that 10-point scale. So that one's the best of the 3. The middle one here, which actually looks pretty good because we've got that nice tight spine, but we've also got a nice chip out of that front cover up there. This one comes down to about a 5. Once you start getting into tears, folds in the cover, that's when you start losing real grades value to your book. And then the far one on the left here, this one rates at about a 6. And not too bad, we got a bit of a fold. The red's not quite as red as the other ones, so a little bit of a difference. And of course, the misaligned cover wrap there causes it to be a slightly lower grade, but still better than the middle one. On first glance, you look at them and you kind of think they're really not that far off, right?
Yeah,
it kind of seems
exactly.
like they're kind of okay. But you can just see how little differences can affect a huge grade difference between it. We go from a 7 to a 5, right? So that's 2 points on a 10-point scale for just minor defects. And that's kind of a lot to take in. All right, so I think that's kind of like a good little spot to take a break for right now. We're going to come back with a couple more books from Wayne because you got some cool stuff, man. I'd like to hear a little bit more about them. And then we'll talk a little bit more about how people can find out more about the value of their comics, the options they have for that as well. All right, we'll be right back.